Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? Good evening.
You're listening to Straight Talk with Dean and Mark. We thank you for tuning in and hope you enjoy another exciting episode of our show.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Straight Talk with Dean and Mark. 66 more days for 2020, and I know a lot of us will be so glad for it to go somewhere else. And also 8 days before Election Day. So for those of you who have got your mail-in ballots, for those states that are only doing mail-in voting, make sure that you send those back. The United States Postal Service recommends voters utilizing mail-in ballots to mail them in by tomorrow, because Tuesday is 1 week from Election Day. Now, the vote by mail deadlines vary by state, whether the deadline applies to when a ballot must be received or when it must be postmarked. But the United States Postal Service is generally recommending voters to allow 1 week between when they put their completed ballot in the mail and the respective deadline for receiving it. All right, so most state lines for mail-in ballots do fall on Election Day, but again, it varies by states. Some states like Louisiana, ballots must be in by Monday, November 2nd. So on-time delivery matters. Missed deadlines are a major reason mail-in ballots are rejected. A record number of voters are expected to vote by mail this year, and the crush of mail ballots also comes at a time when mail delays, legislative inquiries, and court decisions have put Postal Service in the spotlight since the beginning of the summer. So to make sure that your voice is heard and your ballot has been counted, please, please, please make sure that you get it in so that we can get them out. If you understand what I'm saying and where I'm going with it, now some people might not agree with me, but that's okay, you know, and if not, then it is what it is, because where do we go from here? You know, it's been a rough year. We are on Hurricane Zeta, and it's been a while since they've had, you know, they usually give them regular names, but now they've gone into the Greek alphabet. So you figure they're on Zeta now. And it's been a rough year between the COVID-19, everything getting shut down. We don't know when things are coming back up. All of those things that we love to do, like go to the movies and go out to eat, have been shortened because of the pandemic. The pandemic started to subside, and now it looks like it's coming back again. So, hey, y'all, make sure y'all keep your hands clean, stay safe, wear your mask, put all your stuff on that needs to be put on, because if not, man, it looks like it's going to get worse. They say they're supposed to have a vaccine for this thing. I don't know if Dean Geronimo's going to take it, but at the same time, there'll be some people who will be brave enough to, you know, go into that territory where no man has gone before. And hopefully, you know, we can get somewhere better than where we were right now. So I'm standing by right now, waiting for my right-hand man to get here. You know, he's multitasking 2 or 3 shows at a time. So, and every time you talk about somebody, they will eventually show up. So, hey, y'all, it's a 6-man Dean Geronimo in the studio. And from NJ to NC, I'm in the studio with my right-hand man, Mark Lee. So, Mark, tell me what's good in your neck of the woods, my brother.
Well, for one thing that's good is that I'm glad that I got gift cards and other things because not only was because I'd actually timed it perfectly so that one show ended and I would jump on the show, and then all of a sudden I went to the phone and the phone people were like, you owe us some money. So fortunately I had a card that was able to take care of that real quickly and everything. So I was sitting there going like, I might have to use the Google phone in order to have this show happen. But I remembered where a card was. And, you know, sometimes the man above likes to play jokes with you and everything because they decided to jam my door where the phone was. So I think I was going to have to find like some screwdriver or something to work some magic. And I just talked to myself and talked to the man above. And I was like, don't do this to me. I got a show to do with Dave. So he decided to go ahead and open the door. I was like, cannot have this happening. So I need you to cooperate with me. And then I, you know, put that out there as a prayer and a thought. He said, all right, Mark, you got a point. So he went ahead and opened the door where the phone was, and we were able to keep this thing rolling like we're supposed to. But, you know, things are going as you can expect. You know, a lot of folks are paying attention to the elections. You know, that's a week from tomorrow. So a lot of folks are going to figure out what's going on. I've heard that a lot of folks are predicting a landslide for the progressive side, and I hope that they're right. But I don't want our folks to get complacent because we know what happened in 2016. So, yes, a whole lot of folks, including a whole lot of young folks, have gotten out there and voted probably for the Biden-Kamala ticket and everything, but we don't need to get complacent just because we think that we're winning. Because, you know, as you know, I'm a sports fan, you're a sports fan, and how often have we seen a team think that they got the game won, go into prevent mode, and then they turn around and the other team is like a field goal away, and then they wind up losing the game. So that being said, I'm just telling our folks that are out there in the progressive movement to be alert and aware. Don't think that just because the people say you got a 30-point lead or a 40-point lead that you actually got that. Or even if you got a touchdown lead, don't think that you done got the game won. We need to go ahead and close it out. You know, that's what I was always told. Even when I was not a good track runner, as I told you before, I was kind of the bad track runner that tried to run track, but I did have some cohorts back there, way back in the ice ages in high school, that told me that, you know, even if we were leading in the track meet, didn't think that it was closed out until that last person had run and all the numbers had been added up and all of that. I know that those of you that play football and basketball and baseball have definitely seen some leads blown of a major proportion. And so I'm just telling our folks, you know, don't count those chickens until they've actually hatched, as the old saying goes.
Exactly. Yes, sir. Please do that. You see what happened to Atlanta, right? I mean, all he had to do, well, it sounds easier than it looks. Because it was like, you know what? Stop at the goal line, run out the clock, win the game. His momentum took him into the end zone, man, and they ended up marching down the field. The defense couldn't hold it, and they lost. So
my point, because
right. And can you imagine what that locker room sounded like? You know, hopefully it wasn't too bad. And I'm wondering what that White House is going to sound like in about 8 days.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I want him to be crying. That's my goal. I want him to be crying, and I want him to be thinking about where he wants to go for his world travels. Because I want him to be thinking that, because I know a lot of people are speculating that he's going to bounce from this country. So I want him to figure out where he's going. And if he's going to stay here, whether that's Florida, I've understood that you folks in New Jersey and New York ain't really trying to have him. So whether that's Florida, whether that's I don't think California's looking for him either, and I know North Carolina ain't. So maybe that's why he came down to Lumberton. Maybe he's hoping that he can get some love down there in rural North Carolina. But wherever he's planning to move to, or Russia or Canada, but wherever he's going, he needs to be planning that vacation as of the 8th. As of Tuesday. That's my goal, is to be planning that vacation as of Tuesday night. I want him to start thinking about it after he's gone ahead and lost the election, because I want him to go ahead and lose the election, but I need our folks to stay focused. Stay focused on the prize. Don't think that you got it won, because like you just used that example of Atlanta, and I was actually thinking that. I was actually getting a bite to eat at that time, and I saw when the guy tried to not fall in the end zone, but he fell in, and, you know, there's some quarterbacks out there, whether that's Matthew Stafford, whether that's Tom Brady, whether that's Brett Favre. There are a couple of quarterbacks out there that you do not give them any time on the clock, because they're going to make good of it if you only give them a few seconds. So like I said, I agree with you. They should have, you know, falling on that 1 yard line, killed that clock, then gone ahead and won that game with, I think it would have been a field goal or something like that. But, that momentum carried him in there and everything. But, the sports games are crazy because I've been kind of torn lately about who to root for in the World Series, and I'll explain why I'm torn. But I initially was rooting strictly for Tampa Bay because of the fact of that's the Durham Bulls parent franchise and everything. So I've been rooting for them and everything. And that game that they had in Game 4 was just crazy because they were supposed to have been down probably 3-1 and maybe even not had a 6 game. But as it was, they won that game and then they lost the next game. So they're down 3-2. But that game that they won on Game 4 was insane because, like I said, they were losing. I think they were down by 2, managed to hit they were down by 1, managed to score 2 runs to take the victory away from the Dodgers, and it was involving not 1, not 2, but I think 3 errors by the Dodgers. And the Dodgers have already been predicted that they're going to win this thing anyway because they got the best team out there in terms of quality of athletes. But that was insane that you got all these superstar athletes, including Mookie Betts, and they managed to blow not 1, not 2, but I think 3 major errors. I think they were credited with 2, but what I saw on the field looked like 3 errors. So they looked like the Keystone Cops, but they managed to bounce back on the following game and win it. So they're up 3-2. But on that game in Game 4, in the end of the game, they looked like the Keystone Cops making all kinds of errors, including the catcher trying to swipe to make a tag and losing the ball. Who loses the ball as a catcher trying to make the swipe tag and everything? So, like I said, they just look like the Keystone Cops in that, but they did bounce back. And the reason I said I got mixed allegiances is I remember growing up, my granddad was into certain sports. He was into wrestling, and he was into baseball. And I could not remember who the baseball team was. So I called my aunt. Well, actually, I called my mom, and she guessed the right one, but she wasn't 100% sure. But I called my Aunt Julie, who is the keeper of the records, the keeper of the family records. Like, if I need to know something about whose birthday it is or any of that stuff, she tells me. So I call her the keeper of the records and everything. She's like, oh, no, he was a Brooklyn Dodgers fan big time, and I'm guessing because of Jackie Robinson and everything. And when they moved to L.A., he was a big-time Los Angeles Dodgers fan. I'm going to tell you how much of a fan he was. They did, if you do sharecropping, you also got the jobs in the the barns and everything where you do the curing and you do all of this stacking and you do all the ways that you put the different things before you ship it off to the auction blocks and everything.
Right.
My aunt told me that and that was in the days of the games being on radio and then later on TV, but if the Dodgers were playing, my granddad Vernon, they knew, meaning the 3 girls, because it was my mom and her, 4 girls altogether, my mom and her 3 sisters. So the 4 girls, because they had a brother when they were younger that died in crib death, but the 4 girls that were raised by my grandparents, meaning my mom and her 3 sisters, they knew that they could get off of work because they knew that he was going to be watching the game, because that's how much of a Dodgers fan he was. He was going to be watching the game or listening to the game, but they could get off work that day. But they knew they could get off work that day.
Okay. Well, hey, I wish those would be that way now. That would be real nice.
I know, that's right. Hey, well, I remember that. Even as early as the 70s, I can remember going to, and that was back in, like I said, the earlier days of TV and everything. And I can remember, definitely the World Series, because thinking about the World Series, this is during the time of school when we got normal school. And I know a lot of people are doing virtual schools now, but back then I remember there being little small TV sets that folks would literally set up to watch the games, and that was both in high school and college when it came to being around baseball time, because there were some serious baseball fans, and you're right, they were doing a little bit more of letting the kids have that freedom to watch things on TV. So I just remember I definitely remember in high school, I won't say one of my teachers, it might have been my English teacher, popping up a TV screen so that we were sitting there watching the game. I don't know how much learning we were doing.
None. None at all. Be honest. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You were entrenched into the sport. You know what I mean? We got a couple of rings of the doorbell, man. So,
well, I'm expecting a couple of folks to call, including Mr. Bonapart, and I think we've also got
standing
Suga
by.
T that's going to return on the call. So let's bring up, I definitely want to get to Suga T because she's always got some interesting things to say. You know, we've had her on before, but let's get to Mr. Bonapart because he's a new person, and I think that he's traveled the world. So I need to learn what Mr. Bonapart's all about. So let's go to Mr. Bonapart, and then we're going to come to the other guest as well, who I believe is Suga T, but we're going to find out. But let's come to Mr. Bonapart first, since he came to the door first.
Exactly, Mr. Bonaparte. Welcome to Straight Talk with Dean and Mark. You are now on the line, sir.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
How are you doing, Anthony? I had the pleasure of meeting you through LinkedIn, and of course, the social media world is just a great way to meet people and all of that. And I know that you have been engaged in something that Dean is involved in. I want to say that you have had some work within legal fields and things of that nature, but you are also a world traveler from what I understand. So definitely just share with our listeners a little bit about you and how you got into this world traveling, because I think that you learned a lot about the world, and of course we're in a whole new world with the COVID age, and you might have some thoughts about that, but I definitely want folks to learn about this book that you just recently put out. I think that it's out now, or it's coming out shortly, but would love to hear more about what you've got going on as an author and about your world travels.
Okay, my travels, of course, in the 90s when I was a member of the United States Air Force, and if either you're a military man, you know that the United States government will uplift you and and ship you to various parts of the world. Now, during that time, I was if you're familiar with all the movies they make about the military working dogs, the attack dogs. So I was called a kennel master, and I had about 60 dogs that I was responsible for, and we went all over the world. In fact, when Jesse Jackson ran for president, I was assigned to protect him to clear the area that he went in before for explosive detection. But so for that, because of that, I was in Africa and Asia and the Middle East and the Gulf War in the 90s, but it was basically when I was traveling, I was traveling for work.
Gotcha, and definitely that's traveling for work, and like you said, you were doing, like I said, Dean works in corrections, so you were basically doing like some security work and things of that nature. I know that I've got a cousin that is a GBI officer, a Georgia Bureau of Investigation officer, so he knows about doing that kind of work as well, where you have to do the security for folks that are coming in, including sometimes security for folks that you may not agree with. Like I'm thinking that you were probably glad to do the security for Jesse, but there might have been some other folks that you were sitting there going like, I really don't like you. I really don't want to, can't identify with your standpoints and your views, but you had a job to do, and part of that job was maintaining security for those people, because I'm thinking that you might have been in around the age of Reagan and the Bushes, and definitely we know we didn't always agree with everything that they said and everything.
Correct, but our job was to, just for example, the Secret Service that protect the current president. I mean, your job is focused on keeping that individual from harm, and that's it. And so you take the politics out of it, while you're working. So I've been there and done that, and it was exciting at the time. But I was sad that I voted for Jesse Jackson. He didn't win, but that's how it is. But we got Barack Obama, so I'm good.
We did get Barack, and Barack may be giving us through the long way getting us Mr. Biden and Kamala, because I know he's out here campaigning. I think he's either been here this week or he's coming here this week. I'm not sure which one it is, but I do know he's out beating the path for the Biden campaign and everything. So how are you coping with what's going on with the coronavirus and what's going on just in terms of our lives in general? Because we do know that this is an age of Black Lives Matter, and a lot of people are concerned about race relations in the modern era that we're living in. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts as one who has traveled the world and seen a lot of different ways that we are treated in other parts of the world. But I'd love to hear your thoughts as to where we are with race relations, and also where we are in terms of how we're fighting the pandemic.
Well, race relations, I'm always praying that it would get better. I faced a lot of racism in the United States Air Force. I remember from members of the Air Force. But one of the worst things I faced was I was in Germany, and I was traveling. I was on the United States Air Forces in Europe called an Inspector General team, where I had to travel around and inspect the security of the nuclear weapons at that time. And I left the hotel late one night to grab a bite to eat, and there were all these young Germans out. And I did not know that they were extreme right-wingers. And I was standing there and, ordering something to eat, and they were all gathered around me. I just looked at them, and I walked away. But and I learned the next day that I was lucky to get out of there in one piece, and I had no idea what I walked into. So even from the 90s on, I thought it would get better, in about 2020. But things have not progressed like I thought they would be. And that's one reason I think I wrote my book, and I'm hoping that would be an inspiration for some people to change their ways.
Yeah, but I'm hoping there will be an inspiration as well. And I know one of the things that you do in terms of your current work is you're a private investigator. And a lot of folks have stereotypes about what a private investigator does. They oftentimes think about the cheating husband, the cheating wife, and things of that nature. But I know that y'all do a lot more than that. So I'd love if you could talk a little bit about what it is to be a private investigator and a little bit about your company and everything, because I do think that a lot of times people are too busy thinking about the old TV shows like The Rockford Files and Beretta and even some of the more current ones, and that's what they're thinking a private investigator does. And I know that it's a lot more detail-oriented than that, and a lot of it is very much grunt work, and it's not the glamorous work that they see on those old or present TV shows.
No. I do a lot of background checks. For example, I have a client in Durham, a church, and I do background checks for them, for example, for individuals that may care for their elderly or the children. I have did work, following individuals who was, hiding from his spouse. I have done that, even though I don't do much. I have friends that specialize in that. But a lot of my work is death work and locating individuals. One individual, for example, that was really interesting, it was an individual he hadn't seen in 30 years, and he wanted me to find him. He only had a picture of him, and that he went to, I think it was North Carolina A&T University, and hadn't seen him in 30 years and wanted me to locate him. So I get a lot of things like that. But we do get the cheating spouse. But I have friends, two friends that I usually give those to. I do mainly administrative work now. I'm in a position now. Now, when I worked for the Department of Justice, I had 10 investigators that worked for me, and we investigated individuals that violated state law. And that was very interesting as well. The type of people that would things that people would do, to try to make a buck off of other people. So we would investigate those. And then after that, I became an operations manager for a global security firm. And then that work involved doing a lot of assessments on how to increase the security for an establishment or a large company, for example. So I've done investigations, assessments when it comes to security and law enforcement. I've done just about everything.
Sounds like it. And this is your second book that you've done. So tell us a little bit, and then I do want to get into a little bit about this current book. But tell us about the first book that you wrote, which is about apparently your own personal love of God and everything, but it's called Love of God and His Teaching. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that book, and then, of course, we'll get into the more current book. But I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about the earlier book that you first wrote. So this is actually, I guess, your second book, or maybe it's your third, but I'm aware of at least two. So share a little bit about your path into being an author and that first book, and then, like I said, we'll get into the current one, which deals with your travels and everything.
Well, thank you. I didn't know you knew. I'm glad that you knew about my first book. You're a great researcher. But yes, it's The Love of God and His Teaching, and I published that one in 2013. I'm going to republish that in about a year or so. So thank you for asking about it. But in this book, in my position, I state that a growing number of Americans, I felt, are concerned about the level of violence in our society. And, of course, like I said, this was back in the early 2000s when I started writing this book. And much of the violence was perpetrated by young people. And, of course, you know the situation with the young African-American males these days. And I felt like parents wanted to know how to inspire their children to adopt a lifelong love of God and remain faithful to His teachings. And I felt like my book could help keep at-risk children from a life of violence. And so, in Love of God and His teaching, I took a critical look at the subject now, and I started from the Old Testament through the New Testament, and I talked about this complex issue in terms that lay people could understand. And just as some young people, can lose their way, I show that a loss of faith in God in the Old Testament opened the way for its restoration in the New Testament. And so I felt like one of the main reasons for writing that book was I felt like a segment of our society believed that the current generation has lost faith in God. So the Old Testament, however, lets us know that generations may turn their backs on God, but faith can be restored in future generations, and that is hope, and that I placed in that book, and I also in this current book too. I always believe in hope, and so anyway, that's that book. Mm-hmm.
No, say go ahead and everything, because definitely hope is something we know that was definitely one of the campaign slogans that has been used in a past presidential campaign. But hope is definitely something that a lot of folks need to have in their lives and all of that. So I definitely agree with you that hope is a very necessary thing that we need in our world and all of that. So were you planning to write that book early? Were you encouraged by your minister, or what got you to write that first book when you decided to put it out there?
Oh, wow, that's a wonderful question. My mother, she's passed now. My mother raised us in the church there. I was raised in Charlotte, North Carolina, and our church was right across the street from our house. So on Sundays and back in the 60s, she would shave our head bald. Now having a white shirt and black pants, and I was like 7 or 8 years old, and it was 8 of us. And she would march us across the street to the church, and it was a beautiful time in my life. And that's how we were raised. Now, I got in some trouble when I was young. We used to back then they used to deliver the brand new Chevrolets and Fords on the train, and the train would come through our community, and we used to stand up on the hill and we would take these rocks and throw them and burst out the windows in these brand new Chevrolets that would come by, loaded on the train. It was a bunch of us. And my mother found out about it because the police were looking for us, and my mother took us to the police station, and it wasn't called Scared Straight then. It was a different program. But anyway, these big guys, these African-American detectives, they were yelling at us and everything. And then after that, my mother got us into sports, and turned our life around because we was heading for a bad way. And so this book was inspired really by my mother and how she raised us when we were children.
Gotcha. And which sport were you playing when you were playing, and did you do that just in high school, or did you do that in college at all before joining the military? So which sport were you involved in? As you heard me and Dean were talking earlier about how definitely having our own thoughts of watching games and stuff back in the 70s and the 80s and along those lines, but I was just wondering about your own sports involvement.
Well, we played back then. It was football and basketball, but I wish we would play baseball because that's where the money was. So I'm trying to get my grandchildren in baseball, but we played football and basketball in that neighborhood there in Charlotte.
Gotcha. Yeah, definitely a lot of folks get involved in that, and I definitely remember folks playing those pickup games of basketball and football and all of that. So I definitely remember that. Hey, Dean, I want us to bring in the other guests. I do want to have Anthony talk about the current book, but I did want to bring in our other guest who I think is also involved in world travel and is trying to get more of us to do more world travel and things along that line. So definitely wanted to bring in Alan if you could. So, Alan, if you want to come into the conversation, or if Dean can bring him in, then I would greatly appreciate that, and then we'll have him involved in our conversation as well. So, Dean, it's on you to bring in our other guests as well. Dean is not listening to me. See if I can pull it from my end and everything. I think I can do it over here as well. So let's see if we can go over there.
I'm here, Mark. There you go.
All right. Yeah, I grabbed it. I was like, wait a minute, I was looking for Dean to help me out. Alan, we've been having this conversation with Anthony. As I recall, you were also involved in a little bit of the world travel. We hadn't got to the world travel part of things, but definitely that is what Anthony's second book is about, is some of the lessons that he learned from world travel. And as I recall, you're trying to get more of us to do world travel and even do some cooperative economics. So I'd love to hear you talk about what kind of things you've got going on and what kind of things you're encouraging our communities to do. So, Alan, it's on you.
Okay. Well, I always have a lot to say, and I guess in regards to world travel, yes, I've been a number of places, and I think that's very important because if one wants to change one's behavior, one has got to be able to see other places and see oneself in relation to those other places. As opposed to being trapped inside of a racist United States where, you can only see yourself through certain lenses, so to speak. In fact, in psychology, what we call that is a psychic contrapuntal, and that means, a move out of one's place of origin allows oneself to see himself and others in a different light. And that's very important. In fact, if we look at various African leaders like Kwame Nkrumah, Martin Luther King, and various other ones. I mean, if we read their biographies, we'll find that their movement from place to place has really made a difference in terms of their thinking and actually helped inspire them to do some of the things that they have done.
Yep, definitely. I would agree with you on that. And if you would tell the folks that are listening to us and everything about the African American Development Corps, which, of course, you've been part of, which is a non-for-profit group that is promoting mental health, efficient government, and development, like I said, in Africa. And from what I understand, you were also telling me in one of our conversations how you would like to see more of our African and African American populations work together, because we do know that sometimes we spend too much time dividing ourselves when we should actually be working together. So I'd love to hear you talk about that as well.
Well, that's true, but I mean, these are behavioral problems, and so I guess I should begin by saying that I'm one of those people who believes that the primary problem in the African communities throughout the diaspora, and that includes people who identify as African American, is not economic; it's behavioral, and so. As a result of the behavioral problems that we have developed because of the intervention of our cultures, we don't think it's important to work with each other because, we have our world has been rearranged for us in such a way that we tend to look at others and other places as a way as our saviors. And I think a lot of that has to do, I mean, the previous caller might disagree with me, but a lot of that has to do with the way we were force-fed Christianity and a white Jesus, and because first of all, Christianity came out of Africa, but then in the European context, in the Western context, Jesus was turned white and he was Europeanized because it's very difficult to separate religion from culture. And because of the way we were given Christianity, I think that has a lot to do with it. A lot to do with specifically our looking at others or people who don't look like us as the solution to many of our problems. And so one of the things that we're doing at the African American Development Corps, and of course it's the African American Agency, it's a part of the African American Agency, is our core mission is to not only look at global mental health, but to try to establish a base for the descendants of slavery here in the United States to return to Africa so they can reacculturate themselves. And I don't mean, in the sense that we're going home to some culture that was there 500 years ago, because I can tell you from my travels in Africa, those places don't exist anymore. And in fact, I would also tell you that colonialism, in my view, was much worse than slavery. It did a lot of damage to our people. So I think that it's very important for those of us who really can contribute, and some of the best of us, to establish a base there, and from that base, we may be able then to not only help ourselves, but help our brothers on the continent as well.
Definitely, I would agree with that and everything. And I was actually going to come back to Anthony and everything, because one of the things that you deal with in your book, the new book, Dreams in Print, is lessons that you learned and your compilation of short stories that were inspired by your travel. But it sounds like your book does deal with teaching about important morals and life lessons on a range of topics, including self-esteem and your thoughts on faith and everything. So I would love to hear you talk about that. For example, I know you've got one called The New Beginning, which examines the human love affair with impassioned speakers who seek political power. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and kind of like maybe even some of your reflections on what our other guest has said as well.
Yes. So I'd like to speak of my book for a minute. Dreams in Print. It's on Amazon.com right now in paperback. It will be released also in ebook here shortly. But it's a compilation of 11 short stories inspired by my travels through Asia, Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. And the book provides important morals and life lessons, as you said, on a range of subjects. But the stories that I have in the book fall on the 6 headings: on the love, racism, morality, self-esteem, and faith. For example, as you said, The New Beginning. Now that examines, our love affair with impassioned speakers, like as you said, who seek political power. The ending of the book will force many to rethink their, obsession with speakers who captivate the nation. And another story I have is called Blink, and it would make the reader question the idea that one group of people is the master race to all other people. And Thorns is dedicated to the violence committed by young African-American men in their own community. Now, we've had many community leaders and national leaders that have addressed this issue, but the violence persists. And as I said, when I was young, when I was a child, the foundation of the African community was built on scripture. So Thorns helps the reader, apply a biblical perspective to this difficult issue. And it's a very difficult issue in the African-American community. But I believe that people from all walks of life would be attracted to the moral and inspirational messages revealed in the book. And if I could say, to go further, the inspiration for writing my book, every story in the book is a different, came into my life differently. And as I said, like for example, The New Beginning, when I was traveling in the 90s, there were so many dictators ruling countries all over the world. Kim Il-sung in North Korea, Saddam Hussein, Muammar Gaddafi, Samuel Doe, some names you haven't heard in a long time. But in my story, The New Beginning, the citizens of Amadea foolishly allowed an eloquent speaker into their hearts and minds. And the story forces the reader to think before embracing these impassioned leaders. The main focus of the story is on Amadea's Constitution. So, for example, the United States Constitution basically says we the people of the United States, in order to form a perfect union, establish justice, ensure the domestic tranquility, etc. And this story will show readers how important it is to live up to those ideas, especially in this voting season, and how fragile they are. Because, believe it or not, there are people who vigorously support the Constitution in public while plotting to demolish the nation's foundation in private. And and another story, let me tell you about Blink. When I was in South Korea, I met an Asian woman who had surgery or facial reconstruction to make her eyes look more like, Europeans or Americans. Now, this young lady thought that this would make her more acceptable to people in Western countries. But I had always admired the beautiful eyes of the Asians, so I was deeply bothered by that. So I remember going back to my room. I fell asleep, and then I woke up and I just started writing on a sheet of paper, Blink, and that's the name of my book, Dreams in Print. That's sort of like where it comes from.
You bring up a very interesting point, and I want to bring it back to Alan as well. That's something that has definitely been going on in society. And like I said, you have some of that psychology background as well. And, of course, folks usually put it in our community, meaning the African-American community, when folks try to either lighten their skin or try to do things that are more European-centric and everything. But as Anthony was just saying, I've learned that that's actually going on in other cultures as well. There are definitely some things that are going on about bleaching within some of the African nations and some of the Asian populations and Hispanic populations and other kinds of ways that the folks are trying to Europeanize themselves in terms of their look. At least that's what I've observed. That it's not just a African American phenomenon, but it's a phenomenon from around the world. Is that what you have learned as well, and how big of a problem is that? Because I've seen that it exists in just my limited research in a number of different societies. So I'd love to hear from you, Alan, as to your thoughts on that. And then after you answer that, I want to hear from both of you about that whole thing around charismatic leaders, because I personally think that that's why we got in trouble with the current person sitting at 1600, because he's able to have that charismatic kind of appeal to a certain kind of base that he has. So that's where I think that he mobilizes them in a way that is scary. I mean, it might be admirable in some kind of ways that he's able to do that, but it's also quite scary, in my opinion, as well. But I'd love to hear you talk about, first, Alan, your thoughts on the whole concept of not just African Americans, but others trying to Europeanize themselves.
Well, African Americans in that regard are not as bad as many other places, but I think that what we're talking about is an effect of colonialism. And this type of effect, it's a mental effect. So that's not something that you can pray away. That's something that needs an intervention, and the intervention can't just come from psychology, because, of course, besides being a historian, I'm also a behavioral scientist. And so, and one of the things I'm trying to, I work with in terms of the behavioral science field is I'm constantly the naysayer in the room, because, there are not that many, African Americans, for instance, in the field of psychology. I think it's something like 4%. And now I'm actually getting a doctorate in psychoanalysis, and I mean, you can count the psychoanalysis on one hand, black ones that actually exist. And so you have to have people that look like you. You have to come up with interventions for the formerly colonized and oppressed that may differ in various places, because I believe that they have to have cultural solutions inside of them too. And that's very important if we look at how psychology was used to prove the inherent unworthiness of the formerly colonized. And so, what I'm getting at here is that in terms of skin lightening and other things is that, a lot of psychological damage was done to the formerly colonized, and we can't expect that to go away because somebody jumped up and in theory said, after like brainwashing them for 100 years, said, oh, we're going home. Okay, and then they leave them, for instance, in parts of West Africa, in mineral-rich countries. A few people have everything, and those people who have everything are not the leaders of the people. Because the leaders of the people have been killed. They're all of the people who see themselves as the inheritors of colonialism. So, in fact, what they want to do is imitate the white man, but they don't go and stay in the white man's country for long, because when they're there, they realize at some point they're just niggers and they don't have the same kind of money as white people. So the only place that they can come and really show up and be something big is by coming back to their country. But the same thing happens here with our idealization of people like Jesse Jackson and Barack Obama and so on and so forth. So we need to really have a body of professionals that can come up with interventions that can help us think our way out of these things, that can come up with interventions or processes that will take the time that we need in order to work our way out of these things. And that's why something like the African American Development Corps or the African American Agency is so important, because I personally don't believe that African Americans, for instance, can come back into their own in this environment surrounded by all these other people. I mean, many would argue, myself included, that we were much better off and much more prolific in segregation. You see? And so that's why I think it's very important to move us out of this place and move us someplace else where we can come back into our own, and then we can spread out and do whatever we want. And I could use the example of, let's say, the Jews, for instance. I mean, barring the fact that they're colonizing somebody else's country, I would say that if you read Herzl and these other things like the Jewish state, one of the reasons he started this whole Israel thing is because they were going up this whole Zionist movement is because they were traveling around Europe, and he had begun to see that the Jews in the ghettos of Europe had actually begun to take on the very kind of qualities and behavioral patterns that everybody talked about. So the point I'm making is that if you tell somebody that they're bad long enough, they start believing it. Okay, just as we have been told that we can't do anything without other people, we have learned to be helpless. It's something that Martin Seligman calls learned helplessness, and this is what happens to us. So it's a very mental process. Herzl's idea was to come up with a Zionist idea, which is a Zionism and segregation. Okay, and he understood that in order to change these people's behavior, we have to get away from here and start all over again. And in the beginning, he wasn't thinking about taking every single Jew to what they were going to establish in Israel somewhere. Other people came later, and I think that we can come up with some kind of similar intervention. But whatever we do, we have to have mental solutions to what we're doing, and we, in regards to charismatic people like the Barack Obamas and the Jay-Z's and all these people we go after, this is another one of those mental effects. We, African Americans and black people, but African Americans specifically, we are the greatest victims of pop culture. And part of that has to do with negation. Part of that has to do with, I don't want to be too psychological, because I'm sure you will understand, it has to do with object relations. Okay? We can't delay our sense of gratification long enough so that we can get together and get the things we need. In order to be seen in these societies where we've been told for years that we're nobodies and we have been marginalized, we do anything to be seen. We dress like fools. We get 5 cents and we spend a quarter. We buy $700 Nike Yeezy sneakers when we ain't got a cent in our pocket. We do everything, and the basis of that is satisfying a need to be seen in a world where we've been marginalized for a long time. This is the kind of behavior that we need to change. But thinking that we're going to change this with just education or just the Bible, I think is misguided. Because these are very, very mental things. They're mental processes, and these things don't just happen to people. People are not born this way. This is the result of psychological damage that was done during colonialism. It's a colonial effect. And African Americans, I would argue, we think we're free. We think we're vested inside the society. We join the military. I was in the military too. We join the military. We do all of these things. But in fact, a guy like Trump comes along, and the benefit of him is that he allows us the illusions that we have had building up for a long time come crashing down on us. And I think in some ways that's good for us to see that, there's been a myth about progression in this society. Okay? And that's a big problem. You see what I'm saying? And so I think that, we go after too many things, and we really need to start learning how to modify these things and come back to a reality principle.
I understand what you're saying. I was going to be curious to hear from both of you, and I know I asked the other question earlier, but this is a slight pivot and everything. But one of the things that you bring up, and I've heard it brought up in a number of ways, is the need to work with our allies, whether that's Hispanic allies, whether that's Asian allies, other minorities, or even people that are of other communities that are within the European community that might agree with us having a growth within our community. So as one that has done the world travels and everything, what is your thoughts on that, Anthony? And then I'll hear Alan's views as well, as because I do know even with Black Lives Matter, we've heard a lot of folks talk about trying to bridge gaps with our allies. And, of course, there's definitely a lot of allyship that goes on when you do world travels. And I know, I didn't serve in the military. I can't remember if Dean did or did not. I think he did not, if I remember correctly. But I do have relatives that did, and so I know how the military operates in that sense of trying to have people cooperate and unite all the time. And then, of course, the mantra now is that we're in a global economy, so they're always trying to encourage us to do unity with a lot of different parts of the world. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that as a world traveler, Anthony, and then I'll come to Alan as well.
Okay. First, let me say something that Alan said about the mentality of us in the colonialism. I'll just say in my travels, to go with what he said, I met two African American males. Now they grew up in the 50s and 60s, and both of these gentlemen that I met were indentured servants. One in Louisiana, one in Haiti. One in Louisiana he was dark skinned and slept in the cold room in the winter. No, he couldn't sleep near the fireplace, and it was because he said that his family felt that the lighter you were, the closer you were to God. So think about that mentality. And they were similar to what a friend of mine that he's a doctor now, that's from Haiti, similar to what he went through. So that what the kind professor was saying, I'm telling you, is true. Hopefully things have gotten better, but this was back in the 80s and 90s when I met these two gentlemen. But anyway, as far as working with our allies, I worked in NATO, of course, when I was in Europe, and I thoroughly enjoyed working with our allies. I would conduct inspections on their bases to make sure that their nuclear weapons were secured properly, and of course they would vice versa. And we felt strong because we felt like we had each other's back. It's sort of like in your neighborhood. When I was growing up in Charlotte, if the guys would come to the neighborhood and take our Halloween candy, we had some big kids, and a lot of them were passed on now, and we would go get them, and they would go and get our candy back. I felt the same way when I was working in NATO with the French, and in England, and to see those ties start to deteriorate over the last few years, it's very I have a real problem with that. Now, my son is in the Air Force now. He's been over in the desert, I think, deployed over there 3 or 4 times. And to learn that while he was there was Russia had was standing bounty on these guys, and my son was over there, and nothing has been done about that. It really is a problem, and that's why you need allies, because, for example, if England had found out about that, and maybe they did, and warned us what was going on, that would have protected us. Would have protected my son, could have protected your son or daughter there if she was over there. But allies are important. So to break those ties and that sort of like that go it along thing, that pre-1942 mentality that the country had, I'm not for that at all, not at all. So, but that's my view on it.
Yeah, definitely. And I was actually talking about even some of the allyships within our own community. So I'd love to hear you talk about that, Alan, as to whether we should go and team up, say, with the Native Americans, which we know we have in a lot of our community bloodlines that are mixed with, or the Hispanic communities, or things along that line. So I'd love to hear what your thoughts are as we develop our own base, because I am a big fan of what we used to have with the Black Wall Street and a number of the business communities that unfortunately we don't have as strong a tie of, and we keep losing land and losing our businesses. And I've heard estimates that as much as 75% of our small businesses could go under based on COVID and everything. But I was just wondering about what your thoughts are about, 1, protecting our businesses, and 2, trying to make sure that we maintain those that are still out there, and also whether we need to build these allyships.
Well, I think that first of all, I should say that the other speaker, him and I have a very different sense of belonging, and I think he seems like a nice guy, but I think he's extremely misguided because he comes from his military lines and he doesn't realize that first of all, African Americans are not even citizens of this country. In fact, if you look at the definition of citizen and you look at the definition of colonial subject, we more or less meet the definition of colonial subject. The difference being that, citizens, they have intrinsic rights, okay? They have intrinsic rights in the country. So if we had intrinsic rights here, we would not have things like a police officer putting his knee on somebody's neck while sadly a bunch of us are standing there watching with our cell phone cameras, and he chokes them, and, people never go to jail for this. I mean, the fact of the matter is the only reason Black Lives Matter is a big thing right now is because of COVID-19. And if people didn't have if as a result of COVID-19, people did not have all the time on their hands that they did, it would have just been another day. Because this is nothing new. It's been going on for years. Okay? So a colonial subject, on the other hand, as I was going to say the difference between the two, is somebody that has, rights granted to them that can be usurped at any point in time. And this is exactly what we've had. I mean, for instance, we could even go out and fight for something like a civil rights movement and then come back, and the government can sign those rights or a civil rights bill, but then go to Alabama, go to Mississippi, and try to enforce those rights. You wind up back in court where you have to fight for those rights, or you wind up in New York where a cop hits you in the head for standing out in front of a store minding your own business or something like that. So I don't have the same sense of belonging here, and I think that having that sense of belonging, or I should say holding on to that illusion, is also part of the mental process that I'm talking about. And that mentality, that psychosis, is actually one of the impediments to us moving forward. So let me say that. Another one of those impediments is this idea that we always have to have allies, because that's predicated on we can't do anything by ourselves. And that's nonsense, because I am not a minority anywhere in the world, because, in fact, we are the majority on Earth. The only reason that we may be a minority in the United States is because of immigration control, and those are things that whites did to forcibly maintain their numbers in a place as a majority. This is why Europe is in an uproar, because with Africans, whether they be from the north as Arabs or other Africans floating across the Mediterranean and everything like that, the numbers in some of these places in terms of us is beginning to swell. I mean, for Christ's sake, if you go to places like Germany now, there are so many Arabs and Africans in the place, it's shocking. Okay? I mean, those towns are no longer what they used to be, in the late 70s and 80s, where they might have been majority German. Even France is having that problem. They've always had that problem. That's part of their Islamophobia problem, okay? So if we move around freely, we will suck up other people, specifically Europeans, because they only make up something like 8% of the world's population. Again, why am I mentioning that? Because there's this idea that we have to form coalitions and things like that. It goes all the way back to this ideas that were put into our heads in the 1960s, and it is predicated on, we don't have the skills. We always got to get somebody else. We can't do things by ourselves. We're not capable. We got to get foreign aid in Africa. We got to bring in specialists from China. We don't have to do that. What we have to do is start working together. Okay? That's what we have to do. And other people have done that. And the fact of the matter is that nobody is going to understand anti-blackness, which is what racism really is, the way we do. In fact, many Africans and black people that I meet don't really understand anti-blackness because they've been sequestered in their country. So how can we bring in other people who call themselves Hispanics and all this other stuff? Because, traditionally in the United States, those very people have always turned around and stabbed us in the back. And you can take that all the way back to the women's suffrage movement, which somebody like Harriet Tubman started, and they called her in for a meeting or one or two, but then as soon as white men came over and told, white women, okay, we'll give you this, and this, but in order to get that, you have to distance yourself from black women, they did it, okay? This is what other immigrant groups have done to us too. Jews and various other ones. They only stuck around long enough to get a modicum of whiteness, and as soon as they got that modicum of whiteness, they didn't want to have anything to do with us, and in fact, they then became some of our staunchest adversaries. So I think that now we need to be thinking more and focusing on the thing that we should always have been focusing on. That is, how do we bring, first of all, 40 million black people inside the United States together, and then we take the wealth and the power, the trillions of dollars that we spend on all kinds of nonsense here, and do something like invest in land in Africa, invest in farmland here where we can grow our own food, where we can do our own thing. okay? And then we won't have to go around worrying about things like being cuckoo with the gay and lesbian movement. That has nothing to do with black people, because I don't happen to believe that the LGBTQ movement has anything to do with civil rights. But even so, you have a group of people who are fighting for the right to engage in a certain kind of behavior, and they can do that. We aren't doing that at all. We're fighting for the right just to be recognized as human beings. So I don't see how the two things go together. And so if you look, for instance, at the Black Lives Matter manifesto online, or a big part of their thing is about promoting, normalizing homosexuality. What does that have to do with black people, African Americans specifically? I mean, yes, there are some black people who happen to be gay that get killed in the United States, but I would go on to say that those people generally are not killed because they're gay. They're killed more often because they're black.
Well, interesting points that you bring up there and everything. One of the things I'm curious to hear from both of you is, do you think that, and I've had this conversation with friends of mine, that we can actually get back to creating a Black Wall Street or something along that line? Because I've heard people say that they don't think that it is possible to do in this day and age because we're too fragmented, we're too separated or whatever. And, of course, there were communities like that existed in various cities in Oklahoma. So it wasn't just Tulsa, but there was another city in Oklahoma that is slipping my mind right now, or also the different places in North Carolina. Definitely Durham was one of them. I think Richmond had its own Black Wall Street. So there were a number of Black Wall Streets throughout the country. But I was wondering, do you think that we can put together a physical Black Wall Street, meaning like a neighborhood or a community that is minority owned or that is minority controlled, or is that something that is an antiquated approach and that we can never have happen? Because that's what folks that are in my peer group have told me, that they don't think that we can actually ever physically have another Black Wall Street. I don't know that I necessarily agree with them, but I was just wondering your thoughts on that as to whether we can have a Black Wall Street and whether that's something we should have. So I'll start back with you, Alan, and then I'll hear what Anthony's got to say about his thoughts. So, Alan, do you think that it's possible for us to recreate what was the Black Wall Street?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if I did not think that was possible. Of course it's possible. We have to have the will. We've been fragmented more because we've been sidetracked with all these other things, and this is why the psychological, it comes into play. We need interventions that put certain things in play, and we need to refocus ourselves and refocus our psychic energy and our libido. We do. Our cultural energy is been completely fragmented. But I would ask you this question: why shouldn't we be able to do that? Because to say that we can't do that is once again to endorse that somehow we can't do something that every single other group is doing. And that's ridiculous. Why can't we do it? So the question is not why can't we do it, why aren't we doing it would be better. And that has to do with all of the things that have happened to us and us thinking that we have to always look externally for the answer to everything. And, of course, if we think like that, we just go externally. I mean, it's impossible. I mean, do you realize that if you look at doctors, for instance, let's just talk, because you have businessmen from Africa and various other black businessmen, they come to New York and the United States, they go to Europe, and the best ones always stay. There's a drain of the mental resources of the African countries and, of course, the diaspora. You realize you have more Nigerian doctors inside Los Angeles than you have in Nigeria, because they let all of the best ones stay here. And you can say the same thing about Ghanaian doctors. You have more of them inside New York than you have in Ghana. What are we saying here? That we can't do these things? I think that we have to learn to refocus our energy. And I also think that a lot of this effect has to do with the fact that 60 years ago, 75 years ago, we left the South, which it wasn't, and I'm not saying the South was a paradise, but the luxury that we had in the South is that we came out of small towns and small communities, which sometimes you had cousins and extended family involvement. So you had to act very differently. We came to urban environments where we got caught up in so much social diffusion, and this is exactly what you have today. Because if I look around Harlem, where I'm at right now, people act very different. Young kids act very different in 2020 than they did in, let's say, 1970, when some little black woman will walk outside and slap you in your head if you had your pants down and say, pull your pants up, or button up your top button and put on a tie. I see the same things happening in Africa. It's not as bad, but as the young people are racing out of those villages toward the few urban centers, what you have is social diffusion. And if you would just leave some place like Accra or Lagos and to drive 20 minutes outside or a half hour outside of town to some small, outside of the city to some small town, the behavior that you see in those cities, that wouldn't be tolerated. In fact, the kids wouldn't even engage in it because they knew it wouldn't be tolerated. So that's what I think we should be thinking about. We should, even in this new nation that we're making, even a Wall Street, you got to think of where it was. This wasn't a place. These weren't places like, New York City. I think we got to start thinking about smaller towns where people can get back to some fundamentals of living and be more communal, and that's in keeping with our African culture. We got to remove ourselves from the European frame of. We have to start to remove ourselves from the European frame of reference.
Yeah, we definitely hear you when you say that and everything. Anthony, what are your thoughts? Do you think that we can go back to having a Black Wall Street, or do you think that that's something that is not something that we should be striving to have? And I know that a lot of times folks are, and you've done the world travel, as has Alan, but the other thing that I hear people talk about is that they are afraid of leaving what they call the comfort of their own home. And I definitely think that we should probably do more world travel as a people, but I do know that sometimes people get content with the comforts of their own home and don't want to necessarily get out there and be as global as they could be, and because of actually going to the different places around the world. But I was just wondering what your thoughts were in terms of whether a Black Wall Street is something that we should be striving to create or trying to support our businesses. Because like I said, I've heard some very shocking figures as to how many of our businesses might go under because of COVID and everything. But I'd love to hear your thoughts as a world traveler.
Well, I lived in Oklahoma before I moved here to North Carolina, but I used to go to Tulsa, and the Tulsa race riot or the massacre of 1921. I mean, man, what is over 300 people were killed, and over 1,100 homes businesses were burnt, and thousands of people were left homeless from that situation. And it all started from a young African American shoe shiner who was accused of assaulting a white elevator operator, and it kind of resembles what's happening today, doesn't it? With all these young black males being shot unarmed for nothing. But while I was out there in Oklahoma, I used to go to the black rodeos and events, all kinds of events sponsored by African Americans and entrepreneurs, restaurants that they open, everything. So it can be done, but it would take the African American entrepreneurial spirit to rise up again, and I think that can happen. But Barack Obama, and I don't know, I can't remember when he was giving the speech, but he was talking. He was being people were complaining about him, talking about these businessmen who said that they built their business themselves from their own 2 feet and with their own 2 hands, excuse me. And Barack Obama gave a speech saying, "Well, you didn't build the roads that led to your business. You didn't build the bridges. You needed help." So we're back to the allies again. Align yourself with people that think like you, or that would help you, or that would assist you. But so I think it can be done, but you'll need allies, and the entrepreneurial spirit to come back to the African Americans, just like it was in 1921 in the Greenwood neighborhood, and it's still there. I think it's still there in us. We just need the right leadership to bring it out. But that's my view on it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that's one of the things we have on the show is we allow people to have disagreements and things of that nature. So I would love to hear your argument for the other side and everything. So definitely, Alan, what were you going to say in terms of the disagreement and the allyship?
I disagree because, again, this gentleman is highlighting his sense of belonging, which I don't share in. Because, Barack Obama, he was a failure himself. He didn't do much for the black community. He could have done a whole lot more. Okay? So let's be really clear about that. Okay? So the thing is that you can say that, all right, but you didn't build the roads and the bridges to your business. But that's suggesting that we can't build roads or bridges. Of course we can. I mean, what are you saying to me? There are guys in Africa who are building roads for $2 a day. There are guys in Jamaica who build roads. We got people right here who are construction men who are always put out of a job because all of the white construction men are hired first. We have these people. We got to start putting systems in place to mobilize these people because, first of all, you know what? You cannot even talk about allies. Let me say this. We live in a capitalist chain of being, no matter whether you like that or not. And in a capitalist chain of being, you got to have your economics together before you can run outside and start looking for allies. Because if you run out to look for allies without having your economics together, you're a beggar. You're not somebody who somebody wants to ally with because you have nothing. Okay? So we got to stop putting the cart before the horse. Okay? When we pull our economics together and start doing these things, others. Yes, they'll come to us, but they'll come to us because they'll come to us on our terms, and you know why? They'll come because they want to do business. That's something very different, okay? That's I just want to lay that out there.
Yeah, and I can see that, and like I said, what you're talking about is kind of like doing the basis of what I guess some of our Italian brothers and our Irish brothers and other folks did, where they basically built alliances both with Italy and Ireland, using those as examples, but then they also still had their own base within their own community and things of that nature. So, yeah, they might have had their heritage background, and I would argue some of the Asian populations, like definitely the Koreans and the Japanese, are doing that with some of their businesses here in North America. So it sounds like you're trying to encourage us to build true alliances with the folks that share our own bloodline and doing this on a more regular basis and trying to have it happen in that way. So definitely that's something that I think that we can definitely work on trying to create and all of that. And definitely we do have folks within our organizations and within our own talent field that are able to do a number of jobs that are out there. The one thing that I would add to that, and y'all Dean may want to jump in as well, is because we've had this conversation with other guests as well, is that there are limitations as to what we can do. I mean, I think we saw that with the Supreme Court nominees that I just saw on a news feed, just got recently confirmed and everything. But what we want to have done and what we have the capability to have done aren't always the same. Because like I said, I was admiring Barack even before he was running for president for being a grassroots organizer and a grassroots leader. But, you know, then when he got into the White House, he did have to play the political game. And there is a game involved in politics that is existing and has existed for centuries, if not definitely multiple centuries. So it's existed out there. So I think that sometimes that we expect more from our leaders than they can actually deliver. Because like I said, I'm not saying that as a apologist for Barack, because there are definitely some things, including the drone attacks and other things that he did that I did not agree with and that I still do not agree with. But I do also sometimes think that sometimes the progressive movement was expecting him to do more than he actually had the capability to do, because he was working within the system that he was given. And I want to say that he did not have control of the whole House or anything of that nature, or think he didn't have control of either the House or the Senate. I have to go back and remember my history, but I know he did not have control of the total administration.
That's right. He didn't have control of the House or the Senate. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. At what point do we stop expecting possession? And I say that because some folks will believe, oh, well, he's supposed to do for us, or someone's supposed to do for us. But then when that's flipped around, what are you doing for yourself? This is a game that we were born into. You might not like it, but it's also, when have paths, I'll stop at 1990. Since the 90s, when have we supported us? We don't. You know, everybody wants what they want, and you support what you like. If you like those $1,000 shoes, hey man, go ahead and buy it. It's not for me, but I ain't gonna get mad at you because you don't have any money. When you don't have anything to eat, I'm gonna tell you go sell them shoes, and I'm gonna give it to you the hard way. I'm not gonna break my back to save yours when your back is intact and you're waiting on me to do something for you. When we have businesses, we don't support each other's businesses, or we go with a overly critical eye and we want to blast something that you didn't like or you didn't necessarily see that was you liked, so you tell everybody not to go there, or you want a discount on the price, or they should be hooking you up because we brothers. Now, we're not brothers. I grew up in a house with two brothers. The price is the price. When you go everywhere else, the price is the price. How come when it comes to us, we expect melanin discount, if you will, or something of value, and we've given nothing in return? We won't even tip at a restaurant. So how are we going to do this? Me personally, Black Wall Street was Black Wall Street. Come to 2020, your next door neighbor you don't even trust. How you going to go live in a place and then you want to say, okay, well, we got all of this, but we don't trust each other and we treat each other like trash. How is that going to work? At some point, we got to realize that everybody that looks like you ain't with you. And everybody that doesn't look like you isn't against you. Yeah, there's some that are. However, I honestly believe I grew up in the South. And in my lifetime, I've seen that there are more Quakers than Klansmen. So how are we going to play this game?
What are your thoughts on that, Alan? Like, is this?
Well, I mean, he's basically making the same argument that I'm making, and this is why you're talking about re-education of people, okay? Because a lot of these things that happen to our people, this is what happens when one feeds into being part of a capitalist system, okay? The capitalism actually was birthed in the slave trade. This is what the whole New York Times 1619 project made clear. It's never been a friend to black people. But if you talk to any rapper, Sean Combs or any of the rest of them, even the ones in the street that ain't got a dime in their pocket that are just running around talking about shooting the neighborhood up, they all have fed into the capitalist ideal. And that's not something that's exclusive to black people in the United States or in the other parts of the diaspora or even Africa. So we've all been through, but that's the trick that's been played on us. This is exactly what I mean about rediscovering culture, coming up with cultural solutions as well. Now, does that mean that I'm talking about going back and going to become Kunta Kinte and going to Africa and coming up with some culture from fire? No, I'm not talking about that, because the Pan-Africanists like Kwame Nkrumah, who I'm writing a book on now, they expressly forbid us from doing that. They tell us, don't go back there, look, because that Africa doesn't exist anymore. It's been forever altered by colonialism. And in fact, I would go so far as to say, in Africa today, you no longer even have African cultures. What you have is imagined cultures. You see what I'm saying? Okay? And this is why they're all speaking, the ones who come here because they can afford to get here. They're speaking French and Portuguese and all these other languages, or they go to the Christian church or the Muslim church or the Muslim mosque or something like that. This is not African, okay? So we have fed into all these things in the United States because we can. We have fed a lot into capitalism and technology. Those are the new religions for young people here, okay? But those are the very things that have messed us up. And that is why they are markedly different now than they were, let's say, when, during the Great Migration when you had children. People were very different because they didn't have all these things. They hadn't fed into these things yet. You had a Black Wall Street and all these other things because people back then were much closer to slavery. They had parents that came off the plantation, and they understood very well that they were never, ever going to be incorporated into this society in the way that many of us think now, because they understood back then that white people aren't going to change in that way. Because this kind of racism that you're talking about is too deeply rooted in the European psychology. okay? And you'll spend too much effort trying to get this out of these people. So those people who formed Black Wall Street and all that, they had given up on this idea from the very beginning. So their whole focus was to move someplace off on their own, form their own little town and do their own little thing, and they had an economy because they fought from each other and so on and so forth. We don't do that anymore, okay? Because the capitalist ideal has told us all that we need to be individuals, and in order to be an individual, you got to adopt the philosophy that you cut everybody else's throat to come into play here. And this is exactly what you have. I mean, this is why you have people running around the neighborhood selling drugs, okay? How is a neighborhood drug dealer different than some African leader who wants to be the president for life? And when you go in some of these countries that got gold, oil, magnesium, bauxite, there's one side of town where him and the ministers live on. It's like Beverly Hills. And then when you get to the other side, it's like stepping back in time 300 years where people are living in wooden shacks. I mean, what are you saying? Okay? And I think another problem that we have here and feeds into this capitalist ideal is we feed into this political machine ideal. You can keep on making excuses for Barack Obama, but he too was a person here, and he understood very well that in order to keep the favor of white people, you can only do so much for black people. Now, is that his problem? Yes, it's his problem, but it's also our problem too, because if we were more cohesive and we stuck together more, then we wouldn't be seen as one of us wouldn't see us as a liability. For instance, and I'll give you an example. If a Jewish person is elected mayor here in New York City, you got people coming from Israel, the prime minister, to come over here and congratulate them and everything. Every Jew's on board. They never say, no matter if he does anything bad or good, that there's something wrong with that person. They put their money behind him. We don't do that. And for Christ's sake, we have more spending power here in the United States than the Jews do. So we need to look at that. And so what I'm talking about is holding African Americans more accountable. That's what I'm talking about. I'm also saying that voting in an election is not the solution to our problem. It has never been. It just keeps us running around in circles, and we're still like that dog chasing its tail. Maybe it's time for us to start thinking about what Diddy is talking about, a specifically black political party, and specifically, or maybe just completely divorcing ourselves from a political machine to begin with, okay? Because, first of all, if we get our economics together, people will come knocking on our door. So to me, that's the first thing, okay? But that will require us getting ourselves together so that we stop killing each other and so on and so forth. We work with each other. And all of these things, which are, to some degree, are also generational effects that go all the way back to slavery. We were taught to go head-to-head with each other. You see what I'm saying? And we're still doing that in the Western world. Okay? So maybe we should be thinking about that. Again, we live in a capitalist chain of being. I don't like that. I think we'd be much better off as communal people because we are communal people. But I still live here. And so I have to work within that capitalist chain of being, just as you're saying, that this is a former caller said that Barack Obama had to work with the political structure. Sure he did. Okay? But we also got to think about the reality of things. Barack Obama was also elected by the people in that structure, and so he understood very well exactly who he had to pay his homage to. Okay? African Americans don't vote in any great numbers. There are not enough of us. And if first of all, only 40% of Americans vote to begin with. We only 13% of the United States population is African American, and although 100% of us talk politics, when the time comes to pull a lever at a voting vote, a conservative number, if we all showed up, all of the ones who were eligible, it would only be something like 2%. We're not in a position to elect nobody. And everybody knows this is business. Politics and business, they're all one thing. Barack Obama looks at that and says, I'm only getting 1% of the African Americans standing behind me. 100% of them are talking everything. When election time comes, it's only going to be them. White people who make up the 99% of the other people who actually voted for me, they don't want the A, B, C, and D to happen for them. I'm not going to do it because I want to sit down again. Okay, so maybe we can start thinking about the fact that we're working within a structure which is not working for us. And maybe we can divorce ourselves from that structure again. And if we want to come back and work in that structure, maybe we should do it sometime in the future, when we are politically educated enough, we have our financial numbers together, we have all these other things to offer so that we can say, give me this A, B, C, and D, and I want this done. We never get that. We're not worthy of that because we don't have those finances and everything together. What we get is somebody who shows up at a church on a Sunday, claps and sings some slave spiritual song, gives us a promise, we get their vote, they walk away. Look at the Jews, for instance. They never accept that. They say, what are you doing for us lately? What are you going to do for us tomorrow? In order to get and they get tangible things. We don't do that. Everybody is doing that except us, and we got to ask ourselves why, okay? And if we're not getting those things, I think we got to start holding ourselves more accountable. I think we got to stop seeing ourselves as part of something which we really don't have any interest in.
Well, the one thing I was going to add to that is that it does seem that, and I'd love to hear from everybody on the call and everything, their thoughts about this, but it does seem that some of our leaders, now some of them might be coming from the world of sports and the world of entertainment, are at least trying to build things that are owned by themselves and things of that nature. Like I may not be the biggest Laker fan, but I will acknowledge that LeBron is building schools in Ohio where he's originally from. I'm seeing some other leaders that are actually going out and trying to create using the wealth that they have, because unfortunately we are getting a number of our wealth centers being from sports and from entertainment. So there are some folks that are apparently trying to use that power that they have to actually make a change and a difference. So are you seeing that? And even in your own agency, Anthony, are you seeing that some of our power brokers are coming to join you in this effort that you are creating? Or are you even able to reach out to them, or do they have their folks that are devoid and divided from having these conversations? Or are you able to have those conversations with people? I said Anthony, I meant Alan. But Alan, are you able to have those conversations with your agency and everything? So I just wondered, are you able to engage conversations with some of our, not just world leaders in terms of financial leaders that come out of sports and entertainment, but not exclusively? I mean, we have some that are business owners, but they're also thought leaders. So how are you doing in terms of connecting with our thought leaders in our community, whether they're from the world of sports, entertainment, business, or just thought leaders in general?
Well, that's what I do. I'm trying to build those alliances, and I got to tell you, it's very difficult, even within our communities. I mean, again, we have to hold ourselves more accountable. Now, you mentioned, people from sports like LeBron and all of them, and then you have Akon, that Senegalese rapper, and various others that are doing very nice things. These are commendable things. But I would say this. Why are they doing these things independently? See, it's not just that they're doing nice things. The question is, why is everybody working alone? Why can't they come together and pool their resources and open up a bank, for instance, that gives loans to small African businessmen that want to get a loan, but know every time they go to Capital One, they're always going to get turned down. You see what I'm saying? So that's where your problem lies at. There have always been people outside who have been doing very nice things, but we are not working together in the way that we should be working. You see what I'm saying? If LeBron and Shaq and this guy and that guy came together, they could still do these individual things, but they also need to sit down at a table together and say, okay, we're going to form this organization over and above the separate things that we're doing in our individual communities, and we're going to form the Black NBA Stars or Shaq Bank. And we're going to specifically try to do this, and or we're going to specifically try to, buy farmland where we can grow, we can plant and grow vegetables, and we can go in the Black community and sell people, cheap vegetables so that their kids are not, getting all these diseases and not dying from eating Popeye's chicken sandwiches and things like that. I mean, this is also equally as important. Now, what I found recently, and I hate to mention names, but I tried to do a whole mental health thing, and I went down, and it was probably maybe a year ago. I think it was a year ago. And I went down to New York City to speak to the public advocate who had just gotten elected, and Jumaane Williams, and I'm going to mention his name, but I said I wasn't, and because he had, during his election, he threw up and said that, he had mental problems and all of these things, and, he wanted to he knew how it was in the black community, people service. I said, okay, this is a good guy. I'll talk to him because I'm trying to maybe get together, a center together where black people could come together and talk about the effects and and vent about everyday racism because this is very important. We suppress emotions a lot, and that's one of the problems that we have in the black community, which turns into all of this rage that the previous caller was talking about. But when I got down there, it was not like they saw me. They said that they forgot that I was on the schedule for the meeting. He wasn't there. Then come back tomorrow. I said, what are you talking about? Okay? And so I finally did have a meeting with some other underling that he had down there. And then it was not like the guy didn't want to, they didn't want what was going on. They wanted to, brush me off. And I got the sense that, and I've got this sense before, that they want the program, but what they're looking for is to have Danny Glover or somebody come in and pitch the thing. And so, because in so doing, then I get a certain amount of social currency along with the idea. That's the problem. And it goes right back to what I said to you previously about us having become the greatest victims of pop culture. Why should it be that somebody has to be a media star in order to go over and talk to somebody in the Democratic Party or talk to Trump or talk to Jesse Jackson or talk to Jumaane Williams? What is this? This is a real problem because there are a lot of great thinkers out there who will come up with a lot of great ideas, and they're not people that you're going to hear some rap record or you're going to see them on television. We have a number of them. I mean, why don't we have a coalition of people? Actually, we do. Of African studies people like Karenga and Malefi Ashanti and various other people, but nobody will listen to them because all of them are looking for stars.
Yeah, speaking of that whole star mentality, and I wanted to bring back Anthony into the conversation because I know that one of the things that he talks about in his book is self-esteem and things of that nature. So actually one of the questions I was going to ask is that's actually another issue that I know exists in our community, and whether it's COVID or whether it's mental health, and I do know that there are a number of issues around mental health. A lot of times we as a people are oftentimes afraid to have those conversations. I mean, shucks, we don't like to go to a regular doctor, much less a psychologist or a psychiatrist. So I was just wondering, when you're talking to folks, Anthony, and talking about ways that you get them to develop better self-esteem, how do you deal with the fact that a lot of times, even when you have it as a part of your book, that a lot of times we like to give it surface talk or give it that kind of Oprah kind of conversation, for lack of a better term, and not get into the weeds as Alan has been doing and some of our other past guests have done. So I do know self-esteem is very important, and a lot of times we don't like to deal with the psychology of our lives. So that was one of the things that is a topic that you deal with in your book. So I was wondering, when you're talking to young people and trying to encourage them, how do you deal with the topic of self-esteem?
Well, for example, I volunteer at Mary's pantry. I'm usually there every Monday, and we that's here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And as a matter of fact, we give out meals to the needy families from 1 to 3:30 p.m. on Hillsborough Street here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And of course, the families come by, and the teenagers, of course, and they find themselves in this predicament, and they put their head down because, and I think some of them are just ashamed of what has happened to them because something has happened to them which is really is out of their control. And so what I do, especially when the young people have their heads down, I walk up to them and look them right in the eye and have them look at me, and I ask them, what are your plans for the future? This thing that's happening to us now is not going to always, it's not going to always be here. We're going to have to be prepared to move forward. And I tell them about stories when I was hungry, when I was a child, because we used to go into the woods and find food. But now, and then when I was hungry, we didn't have the food pantries like we have now. And I would tell them those stories, and it would kind of perk them up. And then I would tell them about what I have accomplished since then to build up their self-esteem. In other words, you can overcome this lull in your life right now, and your parents can overcome it too, and they will. And that's how I talk to them. So when I talk to these people that are going, all of us are going through this during this pandemic, I accentuate the positive, always the positive, never the negative. And I'm hoping that when they walk away, they will, that they will take what I have said with them. As a matter of fact, they come back every week, and now a lot of them will come over to me, and we'll have a conversation about anything that they want to talk about, whether it's politics or career, going to a North Carolina Central University, which I always promote, and or historically black college, but it works. It works. You can't pick the head up of every kid, but if you can just turn one around and let he or she know that you can do it, don't ever give up. Build that self-esteem. It's worth it. It's worth talking to 100 of them. You can just get one. That's my view on that. But thank you for
that. Makes a lot. Yeah, no problem. That makes a lot of sense, and definitely you have to find ways to do that and everything. Anthony, Alan, I wanted to hear from you. He brought up the HBCUs, and I know HBCUs are very much an important part of our legacy. But do you think that we're doing enough to maintain our support of our HBCUs? Like I said, I actually went to a predominantly white institution, a PWI. I'm going to Marquette University, but I know Dean has gone to an HBCU. I know my brother has gone to an HBCU, and as did both of my parents. So I do know the importance of them. But I was just wondering, do you think that we've done a good enough job? Because I've even seen that some of the political figures are trying to use the HBCUs as a pawn. Because, like I said, I've noticed that the person at 1600 currently is oftentimes talking about the fact that he actually gave more support to the HBCUs than anybody else, or at least that's what he claims. So I was just wondering, what are your thoughts as to how we're doing with HBCUs?
Well, I don't know about the current guy's fantasies about what he is or is not doing, but I personally didn't go to an HBCU, but I know a lot of people who have attended HBCUs, and I think HBCUs are very important because I think that in order to affect the kind of mental programs that I'm talking about and being able to get us back on track economically and reacculturate us, we need HBCUs, not only HBCUs, but we need to go in and totally control them so that we can come up with creating a curriculum that meets the needs of black people and specifically black youth in the 21st century. Okay, and I say that because institutions of higher learning are Eurocentric, and that's part of the problem. You see what I'm saying? So I think that's extremely important for building self-esteem, which is what the previous caller was talking about. Because a lot of the esteem problems that our people have, they're not their fault. They're dealing with what they see. Even psychology, it has not been a friend to our people. But let's not forget, it was used to justify, to say that African or darker-skinned people were primitive, that we weren't worthy. Carl Jung was very explicit in calling us niggers and so on and so forth. Even Freud rephrased in this one interview, one person that he had his Negro. I mean, this is what we're talking about. So if we could create our own curriculums, I would say we can, in our own schools, because I think that's a big part of the problem. Because even in Africa, with the education systems are not controlled by us. They're controlled by outside forces, and there's a Eurocentric curriculum. For instance, I'll give you an example. In 2012, because at one point I was really concentrating on slave trade stuff as a historian, and I was at the University of Ghana in Legon, at the University of Ghana in Legon, and I think this was back in 2012, in fact. And I was on this massive campus that they have. There's a lot of land. And I don't know how I got into this conversation with this kid, but I'm talking about black history and all these things. And he said to me, well, he didn't think that African history his own history was important. And I said, what? Well, how could you think something like that? And he said, well, he doesn't. He didn't think it was important. But, he was not unique. The problem is that in order to get out of that university, they have to take a history courses as part of a core curriculum. And those history courses that they give are history courses on generally British history or French history. And if you would ask any of those idiots what they know, or if they read a book about Kwame Nkrumah, 99.9% of them will tell you no. You see? That's where the problem lies at. So having our own educational system is extremely important, and that's one of the things that the Afrocentrists have been pushing for a long time. That's something that somebody like Kalani Morenga has been talking about for a long time, even though these people are still work within white institutions, because trying to find support for those things among those blacks who actually have money and can fund it, you'd be surprised. It's like pulling teeth. I think that a lot of times they see that and they say to themselves, if we fund this, we're going to lose all this other money because, people in white society who we're in business with or who are funding certain things, or they're going to break away from us, and we're going to lose a lot of money by supporting black causes. Now, that brings us 360 degrees around to Barack Obama and the political campaign. And so that's where our problem is. It's a big problem. It's not a little problem, and I don't have an answer for that.
Yeah, definitely it's a problem that we've got to be trying to figure out the answer to and figuring out how to get those solutions to and all of that. Alan, I was also curious because you mentioned it earlier and everything, how you deal with the fact that so much of the psychology and the psychiatry field is very European-oriented, because I do hear that, and I've heard that complaint from others as well, because they sometimes want to, and you mentioned the very low figures that exist within our African-American community in that field, and I think that's part of the reason that it exists, particularly within psychology, I would argue also in regular medicine as well, because folks do remember the Tuskegee experiment. They do remember the way that psychology as well as other things were used in order to have a means of control. So as one that is now in that field, how do you deal with that when you're trying to get other people to join you in that field and to actually increase our participation in the study of psychology and psychiatry? Because there are, like I said, a lot of folks that have some serious apprehensions about both of those fields because of the history. So when you're talking to people that might want to go into it, what do you say to encourage them while also, as you just alluded to, understanding the history yourself?
Well, that's a good question. I got to say that the answer to that question is intertwined with the last question that you asked. It comes back to having an Afrocentric education system, because if you have an Afrocentric education system, or for want of a better term, an education system that is controlled by us, a university that our people go to that's totally controlled by us, then you don't have that problem, because then what you do is then you can then introduce the people, you can introduce the students, the black students, to the very people that the Eurocentric university system has omitted from the field of psychology. You see, because there's a lot of African-centered psychologists out there, and I'm not just talking about Frantz Fanon. There are numbers of them. Okay, but you'll never hear about that when you go to Harvard or New York University or Fordham or UCL. They act like these people don't exist because they don't want the message. Okay, and what they try to do in organized psychology is try to remove it from a social and a historical context. And once you have that, you're left with the thing that says, well, white males, they thought of everything, and they haven't even been kind to white women, and that's where it's at. And it works within a paradigm of a gradation of race. But those people are out there, and there are people living today who actually do African-centered interventions and are writing books on African psychology and on rewriting Freud and various other things in terms of African-centeredness and critical race theories. And this is very important, because after all that has been done to African Americans, for example, here, these things of segregation, seeing police kill somebody every day and nobody ever goes. These are very psychological things that actually shape us, just as is some woman in West Africa whose children are going to bed hungry tonight because and she can't feed them. This is traumatic. So we need to have these things. The problem here in the Western world is that we've been very skeptical because of the history that psychology has had to us. See, people in the ghetto here, their contact with psychological services is generally somebody in the court, a forensic psychologist who's trying to decide whether the person should go away for life, somebody from social services decides whether their kids should be taken away. It's never somebody that comes to you and says, these are the things that happen to you in this society. Or because you are dealing with everyday racism, you have these stresses, or you have these stresses in a capitalist chain of being because, you have food insecurity and all these other things that cause it. Those things are not even mentioned. And the alternative, what's done is people of color, and specifically blacks, are pathologized. And so they have a reason to be skeptical of coming into contact with psychologists. But if you got them into an Afrocentric university environment and you can teach them about all these other people like the Frantz Fanons and so on and so forth, and have some of these people come in and lecture them, then they will see that there's a whole different side of psychology that they've never been told about.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, that there's a different side and everything. I want to come back to the conversation, and we've got about another 15 minutes to go and everything, but come back to Anthony as well. And it was actually brought up earlier in the conversation, and I'll just bring up the whole concept of our views of the images that we get from church, because I know that you are definitely involved in the Christian church and things along those lines. And I do agree with something that Alan said earlier. I remember that when my parents were living, there was a picture of Jesus, and it was that stereotypical picture of Jesus, the white, blue-eyed, blonde-eyed image and everything along those lines. So I was just wondering, in terms of like developing positive self-esteem and things along those lines, how do you kind of like put it in a more modern context? Because I am seeing a number of ministers, because I have friends that are ministers as well, and they're willing to talk about the fact that Jesus was probably African-American, and definitely that whole thing about the woolly hair that pretty much gives the clue that he was probably of African-American, I mean not African-American, but of African descent and all of that. But that is not the image that we get in the typical Bible. So I was just wondering how you deal with that, even in your own kind of comfortability within the Christian community.
Well, I lived in the Middle East for 6 years. As a matter of fact, while I was there, my wife took some courses on biblical courses, and we traveled all over Anatolia, going to the First Church in Antioch and places like that. So we saw all kind of frescoes of biblical characters, Jesus, especially. So what I tell, I'll just say what I tell my grandchildren, not to look at these drawings of Jesus Christ, the complexion, etc. I basically tell them to look at the words, because I'm hoping they would get a chance to travel the world, and they're going to see the blue hair, the blonde. Have I seen the red hair? I might have seen that. I can't remember. I've seen so many. So I've kind of blotted them out of my mind, and I focus basically on the words. And I have seen, of course, if you're in the Middle East, you look at the complexion of the people that are there, and it does not correlate to the European paintings that you see. So I don't focus on the paintings at all. But I do not, I don't say what race he was or he wasn't, because you can say whatever, but of course proving it is another issue. And there's all kind of theologians out there who have their opinions. You say something, and someone will come and smite your word, and someone will smite his or hers, and on and on and on. It's been going on for centuries. So So I focus on the word and not on any image of Jesus Christ or any deity.
Yep. Alan, along those same lines and everything, I remember that definitely those that study the words of Malcolm X remember that he definitely had some very negative attitudes, we'll say, about European Americans and things of that nature. But then after he went to Mecca, he kind of changed his views because he saw, as he put it, people of different ethnicities and everything that were actually worshiping within the Muslim context, because he was a member of the one of our American Muslim groups and everything. So I was just wondering what your thoughts are in terms of like how we can use, or should we even use, religion as a tool within the self-esteem context. And I was just using the example of Malcolm because I do remember he changed his views because he had some very negative views about European America at one point, but then after going to Mecca, he changed those views.
Well, I think that that depends on the person. I mean, because me, I believe in a supreme being, because I think that the world is in the way it is too perfectly ordered for it to just come about by accident. But I, unlike the previous gentleman speaker, I think that that image is important. And I mean, if we look at history and really pick this thing apart, not just as psychologists but also as historians, the Bible, the images that you see of Jesus are in contrast to the Bible, and we also have to remember that Christianity, it began in Africa, it began in Ethiopia. I mean, you have to start thinking about that. And if you see the original, some of the original images of Jesus, they're never white. Now, why is this important? Because although the previous gentleman may be sophisticated and intelligent enough to make certain distinctions, when I go into places like Nigeria and Ghana, there are many people who can't. And there's so many of them, the majority of people can't. Okay? And so you have to think of what making Jesus white actually does. You see what I'm saying? It's a psychological trick. And it goes like this. In the material world, in the world that we live in the external world, if the father generally looks like the son. So if the son is white, then unconsciously you're thinking the father must be white, and so then that means that now people of color are thinking unconsciously again that somehow Jesus is white. White people, they get some special consideration, and I'm darker skinned, so I don't get that kind of special consideration. And this is the basis of a lot of the treatment, or should I say, how would I say, the kind of subservient behavior that you see people of color have, to whites, not just in the United States, but throughout the African world. And so it's very important. In fact, this is a point that Dr. James Cone made on more than one occasion. So I would refer to some of James Cone's books, because what you're talking about is being a revolutionary in terms of that. And Malcolm X, in regards to him in Islam, I would say that in some ways Islam has the same effect, because I've been in the Arab world. There are gradations of people inside the Arab world. And once again, the African is somewhere at the bottom, and specifically the darker-skinned Arab, whether that person is a Muslim or not. Now, Malcolm X, I love the guy, but I think we got to put this into its context as well. He was there in Mecca as a special person with a certain kind of privilege, so they let him see certain things. They did not allow him to see how people show out and how racist some of those Arabs could actually be. Okay? I was in a cab with a guy in North Africa about maybe 3 years ago, and he was pointing out of the window while we was talking. He found out I was from New York, because I always tell people I'm from New York, never from the United States. Because when you say you come from New York City, you get totally different energy, because everybody wants to go to New York. So they're immediately talking and everything like that, and he's pointing out of the window talking about the African. Look at that African there. Look at that African. Because many of them people don't even believe they live in Africa. They don't even believe they're in Africa. Okay? They'll tell you something like it's in Southeast Asia. They're in Southeast Asia or something like that. It's ridiculous. So the point I'm making is that the Muslim Brotherhood, to some degree, the Ummah, is a farce, because it still fragments not only toward in regards to degrees or shades of color, but also amongst Arabs tribally, and that's part of the problem there.
Yeah, definitely. And I know we got about 8 more minutes to go and everything, so I wanted to give both of you a chance to put out your products and how folks can get your products. I know that Anthony has got his book, and we talked a little bit about some of that earlier and everything, but I did want folks to learn how they can reach out and get that book. And also, I know that you're working on yours as well, Alan, but definitely if folks are interested in getting your book, Anthony, I want you to be able to share a little bit more about the book. So I'll give you a minute or two to talk about that book and anything that you want to share about the book that you have written, and it is talking about these dreams in print and how they can obtain a copy of that. And I'll do the same thing for Alan. And then as we wrap everything up, I want to hear, because it's something I do on just about every show that I do, any words of encouragement or positivity that you would like to leave with our audience that might go back and hear our reruns that you'll hear about very shortly from Dean and everything, or that they might go back and catch this on the replay on Blog Talk. But definitely, I'm turning it over to you, Anthony. Let folks know about the book and what they can learn, and how they can get a copy of the book.
Okay, thank you very much. This has been a great, a great talk, and I really appreciate you inviting me here. And let me quickly go over my book again. It's Dreams in Print. It's comprised of 11 short stories with moral lessons. And my intention is I want to increase my readers' knowledge of life and the circumstances that come from decisions that we all make, decisions that affect us individually, others, and the environment in which we live. When you read my book, I want my readers to say reading books by Anthony Bonapart is a learning experience. I want all readers to finish my book filled with hope for the future and inspired to change something about themselves. Hopefully that would make their lives better. And my work not only entertains the reader, but I believe that my moral lessons allow readers to think or consider evils that could lead them down the wrong path. And my work is fiction, but as I said, it's very important, informative regarding human behavior. Now, my book, I believe, is for all people who believe that love still conquers all, who believe in equality among the human race, and for people who believe in the eradication of racism, people who believe that in treating everyone with respect, and especially for those who pray for the day when young black men will stop killing each other. So I think I have something in my book for everyone. So how can you reach me? On Facebook, you can send a friend request to Anthony Bonapart. That's Bonapart, Anthony Bonapart. That's on Facebook. You can connect with me on LinkedIn at Anthony Bonapart. On Twitter, you can follow me at Anthony Bernard Bonapart. You can email me at dreamsinprint@yahoo.com. dreamsinprint@yahoo.com. And the book is currently available on Amazon.com. Thank you very much for the time.
Sounds good. Alan, tell folks how they can reach you. I think that you've got some work as well that's out there. And, of course, you do have your organization and everything. So let folks know how they can reach you, and if they're interested in finding ways that we can actually connect our communities together, which I know a lot of what your work is about, and that's what you've been talking about on this show and everything, and, of course, getting us out of that mindset, which can be a very poisonous mindset. But I'd love to hear you talk about ways that folks can reach you as well.
Okay, well, I should tell you that my book is not ready yet. I've been actually working on it for like 9 years now, and it's still a work in progress. It's quite a lot of work because it's a psychohistorical book. But you can reach out to me at Alan Chukwude, and of course, you can see I removed myself from the European frame of reference, and I have a Nigerian and Igbo last name, which is Chukwude, which means God is, the energy of God, actually. So it's Alan Chukwude, that's CHUKWUHD, I as in Irene, and you can find me on Facebook at that name. You can also find me on LinkedIn and Twitter, and I look forward to speaking to anybody who wants to follow up here. I want you to watch us and watch for more of what's happening with the African American Agency and the African American Development Corps, and at some point we're going to have a website that we hope to put up this coming year for the organization and begin our fundraising, and I'm going to invite all of you to throw us all your money.
That makes sense. Actually, there's a gentleman that's on one of the other networks that I'm part of called IBMTV.TV, and it's a gentleman that comes on regularly named Home Stoner, and he is part of an organization that is the International Chamber of Commerce. I didn't even know, maybe you knew this already, Alan, but I didn't even know that there was an International Chamber of Commerce that apparently has thousands of members, but they have multiple thousands of members from around the world, and I know Alan is part of that, is a gentleman by the name of Shaquille Latimer. So I don't know if you were aware that there's an International Chamber of Commerce. If you weren't aware and you want to connect with them, I can definitely, hopefully, put you in touch with Home Stoner, because apparently they're doing some of that similar stuff, but on a more global basis versus where you're trying to do it within the diaspora. So I guess I'll just ask you that question. Did you know that there was an International Chamber of Commerce?
No, I didn't actually, but I would say that there are a number of people out who have similar ideas to mine, and and we're all working to try to get something together. My idea is not, but I have to be clear. My idea is not necessarily to go back to Africa to be African, because I've learned a long time ago that that's not true either. A certain consciousness. African Americans formed a certain kind of consciousness out of the cultural trauma of slavery. And so what I'm trying to do is bring our tribe back home to Africa and then see come what may.
That makes a lot of sense and everything. And like I said earlier, really quickly before bringing in Dean to talk about where we are in terms of platforms and everything, we always close out, and Dean will close out with his usual way of ending the show and everything. But we do give people a chance to give any words of encouragement or any positive thought that they would give, in this case, probably within a minute or so. But Alan, I'll start with you if you've got any words of encouragement that you would like to share with our listening audience, and then I will go to Anthony. But I'll start with you, Alan, and then, like I said, I may say a word or two, and then we'll come to Dean.
Okay, I'll be very short. I want everybody to know that our situation is not hopeless. We cannot believe that our situation is hopeless. Our situation is intimately intertwined with us loving each other and us thinking very clearly about working with each other. And a lot of that is going to begin with language. We can't go around calling ourselves N-words and various other things. We have to start thinking about loving each other, and perhaps that might be one of the benefits we're going to get out of the Trump era, because I really do think that the trouble has only just begun, and within about a few weeks from now, 2 weeks, we get this election going, that things may be very different for us here, and we'll see the importance of coming together again.
Understood that. Anthony, any words of encouragement that you would have and everything along those lines that you might want to share with our listening audience?
Listen, what I've found in my life is that people in power do not change easily. If it's something that you want to create on a massive scale, especially dealing with billions of dollars, that means that that's going to affect someone that's in power, and they're not going to let you do that very easy. But one way you can help change this society now is to vote. So I'm hoping that everyone out there will register if you haven't registered, but take 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 3 hours, 4 hours to vote. Your voice will help change the society. So that's what I have to say.
No, but I would definitely agree with you on that. We were actually talking about that earlier. I definitely think that a number of our young folks are getting out there and voting, and we definitely need to get out and vote. As I was mentioning to Dean earlier today, I know a number of the polls are saying that if you want to call it the Democratic or the progressive side of the political spectrum is who is winning, and that they are winning handily, or at least they're polled ahead handily. But I am one that has been involved in terms of being a fan of sports. So I do know that sometimes you can have a sizable lead and still lose because you get complacent. So that being said, as I said earlier, I would definitely encourage folks to definitely, if you've not voted, as Anthony just said, get out there and vote, and also encourage your friends to get out and vote. I made the mistake not that long ago of stumbling across a conservative talk show on YouTube, and they were mobilizing their forces. So I'm trying to do the same thing here from the liberal and the progressive side as well, because I saw them mobilizing some folks. I've also seen some of those rallies that have been held in support of the current person at 1600. So I do know that there are a number of folks that are very reactionary that are out there mobilizing their people. So I don't need us to be content whatsoever. So I'm a big supporter of activism throughout the world, and definitely think that we need to be activists in our daily lives and in our regular lives all the time, and that this is a way that we can exercise our activism is through voting and all of that. That is not to say that even getting those people in power, that you don't have to keep their hands on the fire, because I will agree with something that Alan said as well, which is that oftentimes we think that once we've got the people in power that we've done our job, but we also have to hold them accountable. So like if they have not done what we want them to do, we have to hold them accountable and make sure they follow the agenda that they claim that they are doing for us. And if they're not doing that, then we might have to possibly create our own agenda, because I am not opposed to third parties or other parties coming out there. I know that a long time ago I was a fan of Leonora Fulani, who actually was a original person that was going to do some of that kind of alternative parties and things of that nature. I think she was running out of New York, if I remember correctly, Alan, but definitely she was involved in that kind of movement, and I definitely do think that we need to have various voices out there. That is why I personally am a fan. Not everybody is, but I personally am a fan of AOC, because I think that she does add a lot of voice to the brown and the black community and a number of other communities out there as well. And she is not afraid to build alliances, as she had done with Ayanna Presley and a number of others, including the sister who is Muslim American out of Michigan. So they have built all kinds of alliances, and I think that that is what we need to do if we're going to work within the system. So I'm not opposed to working either within or without the system, because one of the things I've always believed is that part of the reason we had success in the civil rights movement is because we had Malcolm on one side and we had Martin on the other side. I think that you can even go globally and look at India. Yeah, everybody talks about Gandhi and the fact that Gandhi was the master of nonviolence, but there were some other folks in India that were also doing stuff that was not exactly nonviolent, and I think that that's why they got the changes that they wanted in their society. So I think that we have to have all of our ducks in a row, but we also have to have people coming from all sides within the argument. That's the way I've always practiced, and that's what I've always believed. I think Dean is with me on that as well, but I'm going to turn it over to Dean and let him say what he's got to say, including those famous words that he always uses at the end of every show. So, Dean, it's on you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank our guests for coming and joining us tonight, Mr. Bonapart and Mr. Chakude. We appreciate you, and we thank you for your words, and thanks for rolling with us. You know what I'm saying? The Straight Talk with Dean and Mark, Monday night, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Don't forget to catch our replays on the Skyhawk Radio Network on Tuesday and Wednesday afternoon at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you miss those, then we do have replays, and we got replays on Radio Public, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Spreaker, TuneIn, Stitcher, Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, Podcast Addict, Castbox, Podfollow, and right here on Blog Talk Radio, we are the Level Podcast Network, where we have the shows The Black Girl's Guide to Surviving Menopause, The Chef Gang Radio Show, Funk from the Front Seat, Funk Music with Zach, Let's K-12 Better, Mona Shakes Minority Reports, Mullings, Music and Memories with Mark Lee, The Online Dinner Party with Mark Lee, The Plan a Good Seed Podcast with Tish Oakley, The Reinvention Road Trip with Jess Everhart, She's on Call, The Just Podcast, The Mark Lee Show, The Spin It Social Hour, Virginia Interfaith Live, Western New York Original Music, and of course, Straight Talk with Dean and Mark. Now, like I always say, when you walk outside your front door, showtime in the world is your stage. Just make sure that people are not watching the rehearsal. Next month starts November, and I'll have more information on Candid Conversations with Dr. Diamond, discussing real issues affecting women. It's open to women of all races, creeds, colors. It doesn't matter. As long as you're female, you can get it in. But I'll have more information on that next week, and I'll see y'all in 7 days.
Sounds great, and we'll be lining up some more great talks with some more great guests, and of course we'll be having that coming your way as well. And of course that also means that will be the day before Election Day. Of course that doesn't mean that the results will be known, because depending on how close the race is, we might be waiting for another month or two. Hopefully not, and hopefully that won't be the case, but I am hearing folks speculating that there could be a whole lot of counting going on, and who knows when the actual election will be called. But we do know that we will be on the day before the election, so we'll be hopefully having some guests on that might even be talking about that, because I am reaching out to some of my political friends and some of my political cohorts to see if they are able to come on. So like I said, I know we've got some guests that are lined up that are not in that political front, but I am going to try to line up at least one or two that can do as some of our guests did earlier today, encourage folks to get out there and get that vote on, because by that time early voting will be done, and if you're going, you'll be doing it on Election Day. But that doesn't mean that if you can't vote on Election Day, I don't know that you can register on Election Day, but you can definitely vote on Election Day if you are registered. So we definitely want to get folks to do that civic duty, and I know that I will be trying to find some folks that will encourage you to do that. So definitely looking forward to having another great conversation on the first Monday in November, because that'll be the first Monday in November. Dean, it's hard to believe, but this year has been flying by, and I know 2020 has been a nightmare of a year with COVID and all the other things that we kind of alluded to in the conversation, but this year has been flying by. I'm sitting here going like, wait a minute, it's already November. The bad news is I've heard from some folks that 2021 might be as rough, if not rougher, than 2020 in terms of like us recovering. So even if we get a new president, we still might have months before we can actually have some recovery. So I don't know that 2021 is going to be a breeze either, but 2020 has flown by, because like I said, we're talking a week away from November.
Yeah, 66 days. And then we get to see what the new year holds. So, you know what? I'm hopefully people have learned a lot of things in this pandemic, not only about themselves, but what they will tolerate, what they will accept, and what they're willing to do to better themselves. So that hopefully when we come out on the other side, that we'll be better people, you know, and then we go from there.
That sounds good. That's some great advice, and hopefully that will be the case. We'll be better people when we come out of this and everything. But, you know, one thing that we know we'll be doing regularly, at least as long as both me and you can do it, is we're going to keep these dialogues going, these conversations going, and keep on bringing these amazing guests. So one of the things that I always say to all of our guests on all of the shows is do know that they are always welcome to return and come back and join us in a future show and all of that. So definitely, if any of the guests that have been on in the past want to come back on, or if our two guests from this evening would like to rejoin us, we are always glad to have return guests as well, so that they can share what new things they have learned or what their new projects are. Who knows? Maybe the next time we have Alan on, even though it's been a 9-year project, maybe by that time the book will be finished, and he'll actually be talking to us about how we can get his book, like we can get Anthony's, on Amazon. Because I do know about that whole concept of having a book in your head and wanting to put it down on pen and paper, and sometimes it can take decades, if not multiple decades. So I can understand that while we have these great ideas, sometimes it takes a minute for them to happen. And on that note, we're out of here, and we'll see you next week.
Peace.